Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Captain C.A. Richardson here, and today we're going to talk about summer snook. If you've ever wanted to catch more summertime snook on artificials, well, you've come to the right place. This video is going to teach you how to do it. Let's go. Okay, let's start a little bit with the snook's behavior once we reach the summer months. And I'm quantifying summer actually as June through September because this is when they eat plenty. They're nocturnal by nature. So those of you that like to fish the low light windows, those periods after dark, you're going to have a lot of success. And there is plenty. And when I say plenty, I mean copious amounts of bait everywhere, from reefs all the way to backcountry. We're talking glass minnows, we're talking what we call white bait, which are sardine style baits. There are needlefish, there are mullet, there are ladyfish, there are pinfish, pigfish. There's nothing that isn't on their menu. So this is the period in time, if you've never caught one, you should be focused on working artificials this time of the year because this is your best shot. Now, let me clean this off and let's talk about the key locations that you're going to need to focus on to tangle with one of these guys. All right, key locations. Number one, passes and inlets. When we get into June and July, the passes and inlets of South Florida and Central Florida are just ganged up with big schools of snook. And that's because so much of those big, huge summer tides move so much food in and out of those inlets and passes. Plus, we're going to talk about spawning again. That helps flow their eggs out and bring their fertilized eggs back into the estuary. So passes and inlets are a huge, huge target for seasoned snook anglers. Another zone that is very popular, especially with myself, are beaches. I grew up walking beaches and throwing to snook in those swash channels. Along the beach, most anglers are making long casts to deeper water. But so many of those snook are right there a few feet off the beach in that little dip, that little swash channel. Then every time you come off the beach where the wave action is, you go down a little bit, then you come back up, and then you go down one more time. That little swash channel holds tons of little cigar minnows, glass minnows, and especially if those swash channels on those beaches are within, I'm going to say, 500 to 1,000 yards of an inlet or a pass, it's almost guaranteed that those snook will be there. We'll talk a little later on how you're going to target them. Nearshore reefs. Many of the areas, in Florida at least, they have, because of coastal conservation, they've placed these mitigation reefs or these artificial reefs where they've dumped things, and they're bait attractors. And the snook will go offshore, and it's not that far, a mile or so, and they'll reside all summer long on those reefs. They're excellent places for them to go. So if you have some of them on a map or on your Raymarine or any of your electronics, check those places out if they've put them in there. And then naturally, the two what I call generic places for you to look for these fish are going to be docks. Intercoastal docks that are closest to those inlets are going to be great. And mangrove shorelines. These are the outside keys, not the ones that are so far inside. Will there be snook well inside? Yes, there's always going to be snook well inside. But for those big fish, a lot of those big mature fish, they have a transition period and they migrate out to those outside islands. And if you have an area where you can target mangrove keys that are on the outside of the estuary, those mangrove shorelines, well, they're pretty much another home run for finding snook. Okay, let's talk about the most consistent artificial lures that you could choose if you really want to catch one. All right, There are lots of lures that you can use. There's flies that you could use to catch them, whether you're fishing dock lights, if you're drifting a slow shrimp type bait that Z-Man makes the Prawn Star, DOA makes the little glow shrimp lure. There are lots of those lures that can catch snook. But if you want to catch them consistently, these two are my favorite, and that's soft plastics. When you pick a soft bait, whether it's a fluke style bait or a paddle tail, it can be of various sizes. It just depends on where you're fishing. If I'm fishing at a bridge with big bridge fenders and there's big fish, I'm going to be using a big swim bait. You know, something that is a pretty good size swim bait. Maybe I'll use a Hercules from Z-Man, something that's got some weight on a big swim bait rod, and I'm fishing it around the fenders, around the seawalls. That's a paddle tail. But you could also catch them on a 3 or 4 inch paddle tail on the beach, or around a residential dock, or skipping it up underneath a mangrove shoreline. Same applies for jerk shads. If you're going to use a jerk shad, which I've got these here, if you're going to use a jerk shad, well, you could fish these on the beach. You could fish them, skip them under docks, under mangroves, fish them in potholes, and you're still going to consistently catch snook. But those two, you're really going to catch them pretty good on. In fact, they're my go-tos most of the time, unless I'm in a situation or scenario that dictates something else. All right, another very popular lure would be a top water. And I've got one right here, like the Duke Dog. If you use a nice size top water in that 4 to 6 inch size, and you're working that consistently in the low light periods or after a summer storm, wow, are you going to be surprised how the snook light this bait up? When you look at a snook's anatomy, his eyes are set on top of his head. He has that underslung lower jaw, and he's built to see something, race up, and pop it. And you hear that pop. You hear it under the mangroves. You hear it under docks. These things will absolutely drive them crazy. So these first two choices, I'm telling you, they're almost can't miss choices. Throw bigger top waters with rattles in them, and throw flukes and various size paddle tails. I would probably tell you to throw the larger paddle tails, the ones that are 4.5 inches or larger, if you really want to catch snook. They're looking for a big protein source. Flukes, I would throw 5 inch flukes, 5 to 7 inch flukes. Twitch baits. Twitch baits are more like the Mirrodines or the Mirrodine XL size. Those work good on beaches, on flats, around potholes. You can throw them in and around docks, but you don't have a lot of pulling power with a treble hook plug like that. So if you're going to throw some of the smaller twitch baits, you're going to see a lot of snook crush these things, especially early morning or late evening. But you've got to understand, you've got to have that right rod to be able to have the parabolics with those treble hooks to be able to negotiate that. But twitch baits, especially those suspending type twitch baits, they catch their share of snook. Here's another one. I'm going to pull one from 6 Cents here. Big glide baits, or maybe something like the Nessie from Berkeley. These glide baits just sail through the water, and you've got to have a big rod for them. But boy, can you work them slow, and boy, do they have a great swim. And I'm going to tell you, hang on, because these things draw some big fish. If you fish Southeast Florida, if you fish Southwest Florida, and you're throwing these around seawalls or the intercoastal docks, anywhere along there, you are going to catch some fish that are 35 plus inches long. And I mean, some linesiders will smoke these things. Big bucktails. Now, you can catch snook on those 1/4 and 3/8 variety bucktails, on the flats, on the beaches, easily with typical flats gear. But I'm telling you right now, if you want to catch the big fish in the inlets and passes, you need those 1.5 ounce, 2 ounce, 2.5, 3 ounce size bucktails that are this long. They're big flare tail jigs or first light jigs. There's a lot of brands that make them. R&R Tackle make a couple of really good ones. But if you're looking to tangle with big snook, and the way you fish those is you swing them out there, and that big bucktail gets down in the tide and you're bringing it back with the tide, and you just reel it. You reel it, slow it down a little bit so it just kind of lopes, just kind of lopes, just kind of lopes. You're not jigging it with your rod like that. You've got your rod at that angle and you're just reeling it, slow it down, reeling it, slow it down, reeling it. Because you're fishing this thing on like a 5,000 or 6,000 size reel, spinning reel. So you're picking up a lot of line because you got to keep up with that current. But when you catch one, it will be worthy and you'll be glad you've got that big rod and that big reel to be able to deal with what you're about to deal with. All right, let's jump in to the next chapter. I want to give you a couple of tips on those lures. Now, I've already explained to you earlier that snook are primarily nocturnal, and they do love snotty weather. I guarantee you, if it's raining, they're biting. That's just the way it always is. They love tropical weather. If you've got approaching tropical storms and things like that, it gets a little bumpy out there, and even though you're not being affected by the tropical storm, they love that weather. They love that lower pressure. They love all the rain associated with it and the muted light. They love all that stuff. They love the bigger tides that really pull water one way or the other and dislodge bait fish and make their feeding a lot easier. So let's talk a little bit about water clarity. Now, most of us that target snook know that they are a sight predator. They're not like redfish or black drum or flounder that use their olfactory senses. They see and they eat. So clear and stained water, pretty good. When you have dirty water, way more challenging. I'm not saying they're not in dirty water, but it's a lot harder for them to relate to that. So you would have to make your casts closer together, larger baits, brighter colors, bolder colors. Believe it or not, my favorite colors for snook are at opposite ends of the spectrum. I love white, like my hat, but I love purple. I think dark purple or black, awesome snook colors, awesome. If you were to force me to pick one color, I would almost always pick purple. Just letting you know, that's me. Clear and stained water, a little different. It really depends on the day. If the water's clear and it's overcast or stormy or low light, the darker baits are still much better. They're much better. They can be dark green, like a watermelon red or the Houdini color, and they're gonna do just fine. Root beer, they're gonna do fine. If it's bright sunny, let's just say you're fishing that beach, you're going to need those translucent colors, those colors like pearl blue glimmer, opening night, colors like that, or just plain old pearl. Those are going to be better choices. There's another color that I talked about in an earlier video. We'll try to attach it. Cisco Disco or Disco Cisco. It's a great bait fish color. I love that bait fish color. Stained water. For those that are working like that Stuart, Florida area, or some of the places around the Caloosahatchee in Southwest Florida or Peace River and places like that, that water has a tannin in it. It's just darker, or the Swanee snook or the snook here and with Withlacoochee. So the golds and the browns and the oranges, the new pennies, even fire tiger, that's an old school color. Those colors, really excel in that stained water. But typically when it comes to light, if it's low light, I like the darker colors. If it's bright light, I like the light translucent colors. But as many anglers as you will find out there that will say, hey man, it's got to be white or it's not right, you know, you're going to find way more snook anglers that tell you that those dark colors are where they want to be. Okay, let's talk about retrieve skills, because this is probably the hardest thing for you to figure out. A lot of lures have the action actually built into them, so it takes all the mystery away, so you don't have to do a lot. But you do have to read the mood of the fish. And what I mean by that is there are lots of times that you'll run across snook, you'll see them, and they're doing nothing. They're just Cadillacing in the tide, doing nothing. They might be moving underneath one another, but they're not really doing anything. Or they're just sitting still behind a piling or something. Nothing. When they're like that, it's hard to get them to do something. But there are times, doesn't happen real often, but every tide there's a period where they just go off, and you'll hear a pop, you'll hear a pop, and then you'll hear another pop, or you'll see them race out and flash and eat something small. And you're like, ooh, wow, that's not what I'm used to seeing. Well, that is when you do something a little different. So let's talk about it. Topwaters, we talked about that a little bit. Whether you're using, you know, something like a Chopo that has a built-in action with that tail that just spins, and you're just throwing it out and reeling it back, you know, Whopper Plopper does the same thing. Or if you're using a traditional surface walker, like this top pup where it's click, clack, that's what we call walk the dog. Click, clack, click, clack. Now, if they're not real aggressive, you're gonna walk that thing at a more steady retrieve. But if they're popping, or they're moving around a little bit, or it's that time where the salooner is just right, the salooner table has got a little window with a minor or a major, or you're in the tide change, or you actually hear them popping, then you're gonna work this bait like click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. You're gonna work it a lot faster. So there is a time when you work it fast, and there's a time when you work it slow. So you've got to learn those little nuances of working that walk the dog style bait. Same thing with slow twitch. So if you're working like this is Catch 5, one of my favorite snook style baits from Mirrolure. This works like just a little bit heavier style mirrodine. And I work it with the current, and I just kind of twitch it, you know? And if it's one of those periods I talked about, low light, rainstorm, change in tide, salooner table major, then I might twitch it a little more erratically. But most of the time, I'm just clicking it along in the tide with the current, almost always with the current, because they're almost always in a spot where there's current. Snook love current. They just want to sit there and have their head into that current, and here comes that bait. So I don't work it hard unless there's a reason to work it hard. And those twitch baits work fine. And let's just say you wanted to throw like the Prawn Stars, whether you throw this little 3.5-inch one or you throw the huge 5-inch one. You're throwing it around dock lights at night or pier lights at night, and you're just reeling it through there. When things are slow and there's not a lot of noise going on, you don't see bait fish everywhere, you just work it slow. And when it looks like, wow, there's a party going on, I mean, it looks like a bridge party going on, then you reel it slow. You got to be the shrimp, but then you pop, 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 pop real fast and then slow it down again. That pop, 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 pop triggers them. Okay, let's just talk about steady versus erratic. A lot of us, especially those of us that love to throw these big jerk shads, we want to twitch them quick. And when I pitch them up underneath mangroves and docks like that, there are many times I'm twitching that thing fast, trying to pull them out of there, let them see it, you know what I mean? They'll come racing out and smack it. But they're always, if you're paying attention to those fish and you're really tuned into them, because it's not like live bait where you can just pick up a handful of chum and throw it in there and get them popping and stimulate a feed. You know, you're trying to fool them. That's the reward. So you've got to really understand the mood of the fish. It is not live bait fishing at all. You've got to figure it out. So understand there are periods in the day or the tide that you're going to work this thing more steady, and there are periods where you working it, you know, like crazy as a sprayed roach is going to pay off. Just saying. All right, next. All right, now we're going to talk about rod and reel combos. Now, when I'm snook fishing, I would rather have more stick than more touch, so to speak, okay? Accuracy is important, but I want to have a fish fighting tool, because if you've ever hooked one of these things, and maybe some of you have hooked them and lost them, and it was like zing, 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 pow, and you're like, wow. Well, that's because you were undergunned. So here's how I approach it. Summertime snook fishing is much different than winter and springtime snook fishing. There you can get away with medium fast to medium heavy fast, okay? You can. But when we get to summer snook fishing, your rod and reel combos need to be medium heavy to heavy. And like I said, that could be, you know, from brand to brand, that varies a lot. So I'm going to talk about the brand that I'm partnered with, and that's Fitzgerald Fishing. I feel like we have very true actions. And then you can make a comparison and kind of find the action that you want in the brand that you're loyal to. See how I did that? So medium heavy fast, and I like to use 4,000 and 5,000 size reels, even with artificials, because I'm throwing bigger artificials. Now I use a lot of casting gear, so you'll see me use a lot of 150 and 200 size casting reels, and that's why I've got that heavy in there, that heavy fast, because I'm using a heavy fast 7.3, 7.4 rod, and I'm using probably a 150 or 200, but I've got 40-pound braid on it, and I usually have 40-pound fluoro leader on it. But most of my audience fishes spinning gear. So a good rod, if you want a lighter setup, if you're fishing some of those docks or some of those mangrove shorelines or some of the flats nearby with potholes, or you're fishing the beach, you'd want to use something like this. This is a 7.2 medium heavy, so it bends here at the tip, okay? It's fast, but it shuts off very fast. This is a 7.2, this is probably an 8 to 17 pound rod, 3/8 to 3/4 lure it throws. This is 40-ton Japanese Toray carbon fiber rod. Very strong, very responsive, and it's just bending here in the very tip. So you're going to have that touch to skip with. At 7.2, it's perfect. You're going to be very accurate with it. I would probably put on this, unless you have a larger 3,000, I would probably put a 4,000 on it. And I would probably use 15 or 20 pound braid on that size if you're going to use a rod like that, so that you did have some distance. But I would definitely use minimum 30-pound fluorocarbon leader, probably closer to 40 for sure. And that's just because the abrasive mouth of a snook moving back and forth is going to make it that you need that line diameter on that leader. Why fluorocarbon? Fluorocarbon to me is actually less visible in the water than monofilament, believe it or not. And two, it's denser, so you feel it better. Like if you're tying an FG knot, if you're going to the trouble of tying all these technical knots, you may as well get the benevolence of the sensitivity. And with this style rod, 40-ton Japanese Toray carbon fiber, you're definitely going to get it. If you want to know more about that rod, you can go check them out at Fitzgerald Fishing. It's their FlatsClass inshore rod series. And I designed all of these just for the artificial angler. So they're designed for that specifically. Stainless, 3/16 stainless guides, oversized guides on the blank so leader knots go through. Now, let's talk about the rod that you're going to use at the nearshore reef, at the inlets and passes, at maybe those bigger intercoastal docks that have deeper water. You're going to want a 7.6. This is a 7.6 medium heavy, but mine in this series is a real stick. It's probably a heavy for most of the competitors. But this is a real rod here, 5,000 style reel. I've got 40-pound braid packed on this. I'm using a lot bigger swim baits. This is if you want to use those big bucktails, those large swim baits, like those Hercules minnows from Z-Man that are in that 5 and 6 inch size. Or if you're an NLBN guy, you're going to want to use the big stuff. So try a rod like this if you're going to fish that bigger, faster moving water where you're going to tangle with bigger fish for sure. You're gonna wish you had it. It's a solid piece of equipment. I would use 40 and 50-pound fluorocarbon leader with this. It's important, like I say, accuracy is important to be able to make those nice smooth casts, but it is much more important in snook fishing that you have a fish fighting tool for the battle, because as soon as you lock on to one, you're gonna wish you had it. All right, let's wrap this up. All right, the last section, Captain CA's tips for success. These are simple, and you've probably heard them in free seminars, but I'm going to drive it home a little harder for you. Fish the low light windows, dawn and dusk naturally, or right after thunderstorms are safely by. I'm not condoning anyone fishing lightning storms, but those are great windows. But evening time, nighttime is the best. It's just the best time to catch snook. That's when they want to be out there. There's going to be super big numbers of them out there. Yes, you're going to lose a little sleep, but you are going to get what you want. It's worth it. 2, target the moving tides. Stay out of the dead slack tides or those windows around what I call the quarter moon tides, where the tides are very slow, where you might have very little movement for hours at a time before you get that one good tide that day. Stay away from those days. Fish the primo days around the new moon, around the full moon. Those are going to be the days where you really catch the snook, because they're taking advantage of all that moving water as well. Now, I will tell you, when you target those moving tides, in many places on the beach and in the passes and inlets and around those intercoastal docks, that outgoing tide tends to be the best tide. Got to deal with a little bit of trash in the water and stuff that's getting sucked out. But this time of year in the summer, the outgoing tide definitely is the tide that I prefer to fish. Stay off the fish as much as you can. If you see the fish like they're on the beach, don't walk up where they feel you. Don't cast at them. Cast a safe distance away from them and bring it in the natural direction that they would expect it to, as it comes by them at an angle that doesn't pinch them, and you're going to be a lot more successful. Same goes for dock fishing. Don't crowd the dock with your boat, your trolling motor. Try to stay far enough away where you can make that cast from as far as you can accurately, yet still not spook the fish. Many of us get way too close to the fish in those dock lights, and that's why we can't catch them. Pay attention to those salooner, those minors and majors on your tide graphs. They do help you catch fish. I believe in it religiously. Or fish those tide changes. When those tides swap one way or the other, especially that first part of that outgoing tide or the last part of the outgoing tide before it starts coming back in again, man, they can be magic moments for snook. If you enjoyed this type of curriculum and just information in general, and it's helping you catch some of your fish now, well, why not subscribe and give us that thumbs up? It helps us here at FlatsClass YouTube. If you want to learn a lot more about fishing, you should go over to FlatsClassUniversity.com. I have a much greater depth of information over there on all inshore species. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll be back here tomorrow with another great inshore tip.